But we're continuing to talk about parts of the liturgy, and today I want to talk about the elements of bread and wine. Bread and wine were used in daily meals for many people at the time of Jesus. Bread often, if you've ever eaten at a Middle Eastern restaurant, bread was often not part of the meal, but it was actually the means by which you ate the rest of the meal. So if you're eating something like hummus, you might use a flatbread to scoop out of the dish. And so bread was often so essential that it was a way for you to eat the rest of the food. It was almost your utensils. And wine was also a safer way of drinking. The water wasn't always super safe, and so wine made from grapes that had fermented, the alcohol would make it potentially a little more safe, actually. So bread and wine would have been very common staples of meals at the time of Jesus. They were also used during Israel's sacrificial rites. Bread and wine were among the kinds of sacrifices that could be made. For the ancient Israelites, bread was just incredibly basic. It was, and I find that really moving, actually, because God could have chosen something else to be our sacrament. The sacraments are outward and visible signs of inward and spiritual grace. The outward and visible sign is the bread and the wine. The inward and spiritual grace is to receive the life of Christ, his body and blood, into ourselves. God could have chosen something that was harder to get. Imagine God chose a very special flower that only grows on the top of this certain hill in the middle of some mountain range in the middle of Israel, and it only grows there. And so we would have had to go through incredible efforts to try to make sure that we could procure this so that we could have our Eucharistic feast. But that's not what God chose. God chose very, very simple elements, bread and wine, which would have been available to everybody. God wanted to come in the ordinary elements of life. He wanted to come to what was already before us, so that there would be no hierarchy of some who can obtain this and some who can't. And I think that's a really beautiful thing to think about. So we receive this bread and this wine, and in the bread and the wine we also see the labor of all that has gone into that. We see the wheat that had to be ground and made into flour and made into patties, we say, or wafers, sorry. So we see the farmer in that, we see the rain, we see the sun, we see the plants growing, we see the effort to mill that wheat, we see the effort and energy that has gone into it. And Christians have reflected on this for a long time, the idea that many grains will be gathered to make one bread. And here we are as Christians, many gathered to make up one body. We are the body of Christ, but we are many. Same thing with the grapes. The farmer, the vine dresser who grows the grapes and then processes them to make wine, the people who deliver them. All of this is a gathering of many to make something unified. So in addition to being very common elements of a meal in the first century in Israel, it also has the symbolic dimension of the many gathered into unity. St. Augustine, when he was giving the Eucharist, he was preaching to people who had just been baptized, and he said, receive your own mystery. That they now being baptized are the body of Christ, and they are about to receive the body of Christ. They have been gathered together in unity in the body of Christ to be made into the body of Christ, and here they are about to receive the body of Christ. So there's multiple ways that Christians have reflected on the reality of the bread and the wine. was also considered a civilized practice in the Roman period, even before the time of Jesus, to mix a little water with your wine. To drink wine without mixing water in was considered a kind of a crass. So a civilized person would mix water with their wine. And Christians, through that practice, have seen many symbols in that practice. The mixing of divinity and humanity in Jesus. The water and the blood that poured from Christ's side on the cross that we read about in John 9:34. And it maybe points to our life joining with Christ as well. Our ordinariness joining with the blood of Christ. There's lots of ways in which people have thought about this, that people have reflected on this and saw symbols in it. But I think it's very important to just remind ourselves that God chose what was very, very simple to come to us. He chose what was very easily available to be the means by which he would grant us spiritual food. And I think that's a beautiful thing, that God would not choose something really, really difficult to obtain, but something that was already at hand. And that gives the danger that we can take it for granted because it is bread and wine are common. But we should not forget that God makes it uncommon. I hope that's helpful.